One of the biggest world premieres of the recent Game Awards is 4 minutes of brand new gameplay of The Legend of Zelda for Wii U. And when we say biggest, we mean it literally, as the game world is gigantic. But perhaps ironically, the footage itself is really tiny since Nintendo displayed on a TV several feet from the camera. But we tried our best to enhance the footage as much as possible. And you know what that means, we ran it all through our handy dandy analysis machine to see what secrets the footage might be hiding. So let's get started. Okay, so perhaps the most important thing to take away from the footage is that the game world is huge, as we already mentioned. I mean, you can look down upon a world that stretches for miles before your very eyes. It can almost be a little overwhelming, but thankfully the game has a handy feature that allows you to enter a first-person perspective and plant a beacon somewhere off in the distance that'll then show up on the gamepad's map. Although, there does appear to be a limit as to how far away you can place a beacon, as we can see the color of the cursor change from white to red, showing when a location is close enough for a beacon to be planted. Now interestingly, Skyward Sword actually had a very similar beacon feature, only it worked in the exact opposite way, with you placing the beacon on the map and a pillar of light then appearing in the game world itself, whereas this time it doesn't appear to show up in the real world at all once you've planted it. But that's for a good reason, as it appears that the map can be displayed on the gamepad even as you play, just like in Wind Waker HD. And that map actually gives us an even better idea of how big this game world really is. So obviously, the green arrow here represents Link, and the direction he's facing, whereas the red X is the beacon. So that's a huge distance as we already saw. So this appears to be the default map view. And from it, you can either zoom in once or zoom out twice. And we know these are the maximum zoom levels since the zoom in and zoom out buttons become inactive when you reach the limit, meaning there are 4 zoom levels in total. So the question is, does the zoomed out view represent the entirety of the game world? Well, we think it might, because the map stays centered on your location at every zoom level except for the last one where the map fills the entire screen. And guess what? The Wind Waker, which also had a gigantic world, also had 4 levels of zoom, with the maximum one also showing the full map. Of course, we can't know for sure quite yet. After all, although the south and eastern sides appear to border the ocean, we can see that the landmass extends off-screen to the north and west. But no matter how you slice it, this world is absolutely gigantic. But how big is it exactly? Well, we did some quick measurements to figure it out. I mean, roughly. So do you remember the distance from Link to the beacon? Yeah, that's pretty far, right? Well, if we measure the game world diagonally going off the map, it appears to be roughly 16 times that length. Yeah, this place is huge! And we think we figured out where most of the trailer scenes take place within this area. But more on that later. Now, besides the 2 zoom buttons on the map, there's yet a 3rd button beneath them, which unfortunately we don't see used in the footage. But the icon does bear resemblance to pinning locations in mapping programs, so maybe it's an alternate way of placing beacons. Or maybe it has something to do with the in-game locations, like being a toggle to turn map icons on or off. And we can actually see 2 such icons like this in the footage, which actually scale with the map size, becoming larger as you zoom out, which shows that they're a dynamic object and not just a static part of the map, which also suggests they're probably of some importance, but more on them later. So that's 2 icons down, but where are the rest? Surely there has to be more than just these 2, right? Well, since this footage is likely from earlier in the game, we're guessing these spots only appear once you've actually visited them yourself. As for the question mark in the bottom left corner, we're guessing it serves as a legend for the map, perhaps explaining what the various icons that appear mean. Now on the opposite side of the screen is a button with 6 dots, which might look familiar to Android users. Now in Android, this button opens up the app launcher, and we suspect it serves a similar purpose here, allowing you to instantly switch to other uses for the gamepad, such as managing your inventory. Again, not terribly unlike Wind Waker HD. Moving on, a compass can be found in the lower right corner, and finally there's a digital 24-hour clock displayed at the top of the map. Right now it's displaying 1900 hours, which means it's 7 PM in the game, which matches up perfectly with a setting sun during this scene, so we're guessing it'll be completely dark by 8. But based on the fact that the current time is permanently displayed with hourly precision suggests that time will play a pretty big role in this game, perhaps more so than previous Zelda games. Now interestingly, although we do see several different times a day between all of the clips, the time of day doesn't visibly change during any one of them. I mean, the sun doesn't appear to move at all in the lengthy sunset scene, nor does the lighting change. All this suggests that the days are far longer now than they have ever been before. And interestingly, the time of the clock doesn't even change in the 17 seconds to see it displayed on screen. Now this could be explained by the developers perhaps pressing pause before accessing the map. Or another possibility is maybe the clock only updates in hourly increments. It would explain that the clock is set at exactly 1900 hours, which seems oddly precise. Now speaking of the time of day, the lighting in the game is nothing short of breathtaking. Take the bloom lighting effect of the sun for instance, and how the beams of light appear to envelop everything in front of it, like the tree here. Or how the mountains in front appear in silhouette form against the setting sun. And speaking of mountains, check this out. The part of the mountain facing the sun is accurately lit up, whereas the side facing away is cast in shadow, much as you would expect in real life. Hell, even the valley below appears to get darker the deeper it is. And of course, even Link's shadow is accurately portrayed, stretching in the direction opposite the sun, and is not just Link that casts a shadow, but pretty much every major object in the game, including trees, bushes, and statues. It's rather impressive that almost everything casts a realistic shadow in real time. So whereas the shadows are long during the sunset, they're considerably shorter later on when taken during broad daylight. Like I said, it's pretty breathtaking. So it's pretty clear based on the long days and gigantic environment that just traveling around the world is going to be a massive part of the game. Of course, you can try getting around on foot, but as the developers said themselves, that'll probably take a while. But luckily, you have a couple of different options at your disposal. And first up is a sailcloth, an item that returns from Skyward Sword. Only this time, it functions more like the Deku Leaf from Wind Waker, allowing you to glide for long distances. And since the developers mentioned they're putting in lots of high places, it's pretty clear the sailcloth will be a huge time saver for crossing large parts of the world. And we have a sneaking suspicion it might be of more use than simply getting back to ground level, because if it functions like it did in Skyward Sword, then you might be able to use it to catch upward wind gusts to quickly fly up to high areas too, which could also be a huge time saver given how many mountains are around this world. Okay, so the sailcloth has you covered when you're in the air, but what about when you're back on the ground, where you'll spend most of your time? Well, that's where Link's trusty steed Epona comes in, allowing him to cross vast distances on the ground at a much higher speed. Now in every previous 3D Zelda game they could ride Epona in, you were always able to summon her at any time by playing Epona's song on Link's instrument of choice. So we'd be very surprised if there weren't a similar mechanic here as well, especially given how essential she seems to be this time around. And based on the button icons that appear on the screen when you ride her, it seems she'll control similarly too. But, as the developers mentioned during the video, Epona now has a mind of her own, and will automatically avoid running into trees and other objects, allowing you to focus on more important things like consulting your map while riding. Again, kinda like sailing in Wind Waker HD. And just like in that game, you also have full camera control at all times, which is a rarity in the Zelda series. And we think this newfound freedom could allow for a greater focus on horseback combat too, especially since the mere fact that you're able to swing your sword while riding horseback is strong evidence that you'll be facing off against enemies riding creatures of their own, like in Twilight Princess. And since you no longer need to micromanage Epona, you'll now be able to attack them without worrying too much about where you're going. Now throughout the gameplay, we can see you'll still be able to make Epona go faster by pressing the A button, as shown by the word GO here. Now in past games, you could only do this back to back 6 times before Epona had to take a short rest to recharge. But this time, it looks like this limit is either greatly extended or gone entirely, as we can see and hear Link perform the speed boost 18 times in the scene alone, with almost no breaks in between. And that does seem to make sense given how big the world is, and how annoying it would be to pace yourself for lengthy amounts of time. Although we can't help but feel bad for Epona. That poor girl's going to be exhausted. Now there's still one button left in the on-screen display that we haven't mentioned yet, the R button. But we're pretty sure this is how you vault from Epona into the air, as it's the only horseback exclusive maneuver that's unaccounted for. And speaking of which, that looks pretty awesome, right? This new maneuver allows you to get the drop on your enemies by leaping into the air mid-stride and entering slow motion for a few seconds, giving you plenty of time to carefully line up your bow for a precision shot. Pretty snazzy, right? Now we actually see this maneuver performed twice in the gameplay footage. It lasts about 3 seconds the first time, while only 2 seconds the second time, which suggests you have full control over how long the bullet time effect lasts for. And it doesn't seem to be tied to your shot either, because the effect lasts for a different amount of time after firing the arrow in both clips. So we're guessing the slow motion lasts for as long as you hold down the R button, which means you might be able to fire off multiple shots in a single go. Although we suspect it'll end automatically at some point, but whether that's when you hit the ground or earlier is another question. Now all of this raises some questions about the rest of the controls, because so far, they mirror Wind Waker HD almost perfectly. So going with that idea, the B button would be used for your sword, and the bow and arrow might be on one of the item slots, such as either X, Y, or R. Except for the fact the R button's already been accounted for. So either they move the third item slot to another button, like ZR, or maybe you'll only have 2 item slots this time around, like in Twilight Princess on the Wii. But that then raises a question of what the R button's used for when you're not on the horse. Maybe it's used to crouch and use your shield instead of ZR. Or maybe that's how you activate the sailcloth. Both it and vaulting from the horse involve jumping into the air after all, and it makes sense in both instances to hold the button as long as you want the effect to last for. And we do have one more related thought. Did you notice how you can actually see the bow on Link's back at all times? That seems like it'd be pretty important, right? We can't help but wonder if this means that the bow might actually be set to a permanent button for easy access, just like the sword, which is also visible. Okay, that's enough about the boring controls. Let's get back to vaulting from the horse, because that's awesome. Now this entire maneuver is rather unusual for a Zelda game, since slow motion combat isn't exactly something the series is known for. Which makes me wonder if there could be a story-based reason for this. Well, do you remember how during the E3 trailer, we saw Link fire a glowing blue arrow? Back then, we suggested that this could be related to the time shift stones that appeared in Skyward Sword, as they had the same distinctive blue color. And as their name suggests, they had the ability to alter time. So perhaps something similar is happening here, with that same time-shifting technology being used to slow down time for Link, without affecting the rest of the world. In fact, if we go back to the E3 trailer, we can see that same bullet time effect during that exact same maneuver as Link readies his arrow. And speaking of arrows, whenever Link aims a bow while on the horse, an on-screen arrow prompt appears showing how many arrows he has left. In this case, he has 100 left, which is far higher than the usual 30 he starts most games with. So did he find a quiver upgrade already? Or is the starting amount really just that much higher? Then there's an icon directly below that looks like a control pad with the up and down direction seemingly highlighted. We think this means you can switch dynamically between arrows with the press of a button, just as Link could in Wind Waker. So this could mean we might see the return of the magical fire and ice arrows from that same game. In fact, it's probably a pretty safe bet, given that the magic meter finally returns for the first time in a 3D Zelda since Wind Waker. Only this time it's a lot thinner than before. Unfortunately, we don't see any use of magic during the gameplay itself, but it does seem that the magic meter drops slightly at some point during the video, showcasing that Link does have at least one move that can use it. We're just not sure what. And speaking of Link's equipment, we can see he has a new wooden shield as well. And if you take a close look at the design, it actually resembles an eyeball. Here's a pupil, the eyelids, and eyelashes. And does that look at all familiar to you? Like, oh, I don't know, the symbol of the Sheikah from previous Zelda games? So could this hint at some kind of connection to the Sheikah people? Maybe the shield was a gift from them. Besides the shield, we can see Link also wearing a cloak in a few different horseback scenes, and it appears to be the same cloak from the E3 trailer. But what purpose does it serve? Because it doesn't seem to have any effect in the gameplay, besides making Link look different. Maybe Link can wear it to maintain a low profile, like when walking around? Or maybe the cloaks function like tunics in this game, with different ones giving him different abilities. We're really just spitballing here. Now let's talk a bit about Link himself for a moment. And yes, I said himself, because despite some early speculation based on his appearance in the trailer, we now know for sure that he's a boy, because the directors referred to Link as he throughout the video. Similarly, we also got confirmation that Link is in fact right-handed this time, as we can tell when he swings a sword while riding horseback. Now this is pretty interesting for a couple of reasons. One, Link has historically been left-handed, except in the Wii version of Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, because both games are built around motion controls, and the developers wanted the character to hold a sword in the same hand that the player holds a Wii Remote in. But since we can see the developer swinging the sword while using the gamepad, it seems that Wii Remote controls won't be returning for this game. So we can't think of any other reason for making Link right-handed except as an intentional connection to Skyward Sword. So could this game be a direct sequel? We already have several Skyward Sword connections already, what with the general cel-shaded art style, cell-cloth item, and potentially time-shift stones too. So it would make sense. But even though the game may have a story-based connection to Skyward Sword, it seems the gameplay will be anything but. Whereas Skyward Sword is based around traversing a series of relatively small areas in a mostly linear fashion, Zelda Wii U seems to be going for a much more open design, where you can travel anywhere you want, however you want, whenever you want. For example, at one point in the gameplay footage, the directors come across a pair of suspicious-looking statues that they note themselves must be near a dungeon. So the fact that they just stumbled across it, combined with its relatively unobtrusive design, suggests that this is standard protocol for this game. Now, if you're an old-school Zelda fan, then this may remind you of the original Legend of Zelda, where dungeons were also relatively low-key, could be stumbled upon at any time, and completed in almost any order. In fact, many people have noticed a striking similarity between the cliff scene in the latest footage and this piece of artwork for the original Legend of Zelda game. Yeah, you probably don't need me to point out that both Links are posed on the edge of a high cliff, looking over a vast landscape below, against a backdrop of mountains and a setting sun. Hell, Link's even holding his sword in the right hand here too. Both images suggest an unusually strong sense of freedom and openness. And on that note, it's about time we take a look at some of the world that Link now finds himself in. So let's go ahead and break down the scenes in order of appearance. And we're even going to try and place where we think the footage takes place on the world map too. So for reference, here's a starting location, and here's where we think the gameplay ends at, which we'll explain why shortly. Okay, so the trailer opens up with Link standing on a path that leads right up to the cliff we just mentioned, right around the tower here. But interestingly, a series of flags can be found just below. But why? Are they marking the path up to this point? Or maybe there's some kind of settlement or something of importance nearby. After all, there does appear to be a fence here too. Maybe it has something to do with that nearby tower. And as Link gets closer, we can see there's a ladder you can use to climb right up it. Of course, that's not the only tower around, as there's another one right next to where Link sets up his beacon. So what's the deal with these things? They did remind us of similar looking towers that dotted the ocean in Wind Waker, although they didn't serve much purpose in that game. So did they simply function as high vantage points this time? The developers did say they were adding many high places after all. It's also possible you might be able to leap from them using the cell-cloth. After all, there doesn't seem to be a railing on the observation deck. Man, they have some pretty lax building codes here. Now besides the towers, you can see there's also a waterfall running down the distant mountain. And to Link's left, there appears to be a path leading up to what might be some kind of building. As for the valley below, well, it's filled with a lot of trees. All of which, by the way, are accounted for on the map when zoomed in. Yeah, it's pretty detailed. And speaking of the map, do you see that path running between the trees? You can see it in the game world too, although it appears to be more of a clearing than an actual roadway. So that's about all we can see of note from here, but check this out. When Link takes to the air, you can see something glimmering off in the distance. And as it turns out, we actually get a better look at it when Link's placing the beacon. And it looks like some kind of circular metallic platform surrounded by short pillars. But what is it? Maybe it's some kind of portal or a warp point, which would make a lot of sense in a world this large. Well, whatever it is, it must be pretty important because it also appears on the map in icon form. And speaking of icons, there's one that looks kinda like a building just a short ways behind Link's current location. What could that be? Maybe it represents a town? Perhaps the one Link starts in? At the very least, it seems he might start the adventure somewhere here to the southeast, since this footage is pretty clearly from early in the game, based on a few different things. For one, Link has only 5 hearts so far, which is actually one less than he started with in Skyward Sword, but 2 more than most Zelda games. So this could be the new default amount, or maybe he actually did find a couple of heart containers already. Either way, we're guessing you'll still max out at 20 heart containers in total, since we can clearly see 10 of them will be able to fit on the row above the magic meter, and there's usually 2 rows of them. Then there's the fact that Link still hasn't found his trademark green tunic, further suggesting this takes place early into the adventure. Oh, plus he only has a wooden shield too, which is usually the first one you find. Alright, we're getting pretty far off topic here, so let's get back to the game world. So while Link's flying through the air, the footage cuts to what looks like a new area. Or is it? It actually can't be that far away since the time of day appears to be the same. And in fact, we can see what appears to be the same tower in the distance where we placed the beacon, which we base on the fact that the setting sun is still to the left, and that the mountains behind the tower match up with the ones in the previous scene. So if we take a look at the map, then this scene should be taking place right around here. And do you see that lake on the map? Well, it should be the one right down here in the footage. So at the very start of this clip, we can see some ivy on the wall, and we can't help but wonder if it might be climbable like in past games. Although in this case, it doesn't seem like it would lead anywhere important. Now when Link turns around, we can see there's a lit torch here, which seems a bit odd considering nothing of importance appears to be nearby. So what's that about? Is it marking something important? Well, although it could just be a trick of the lighting, it almost appears like there's a cave entrance just past Epona. Is that why it's here? Although, based on the map, we should also be near that weird shiny circular thing I pointed out before, so maybe it has something to do with that. At any rate, we can't help but wonder if you might be able to fire an arrow through the fire to create a fire arrow, like an Ocarina of Time. And if so, could that catch the foliage on fire, like in the E3 trailer? The next scene appears to take place the following day in broad daylight, with Link exploring a heavily forested area next to what appears to be a small body of water, which means this scene could be taking place next to any number of small lakes as shown on the map. However, based on some of the later scenes that we think take place right around here, we think this scene might be taking place next to this lake in particular, since it's on the way to the final destination. But more on that in a bit. Now the next clip appears to take place in an area nearby, because the time of day hasn't changed. And it's here that we might get our first official sign of civilization, with what could be a house in the far back. And just afterward, we can see some kind of creature off to the left. It almost looks like another horse with what could be a rider on top, although it's really hard to tell. But if so, could that be the owner of the nearby house? Also, do you see that really tall thing in the back? Yeah, it's not a tower, it's a really tall tree, which is pretty unusual based on everything we've seen so far. Now the next scene appears to be an entirely different area based on the types of trees here, as well as the amount of time that's passed. And if we look ahead, we can see a pair of statues. Yep, the very same pair of statues that the directors say mark a nearby dungeon in the next clip. And here's where it gets interesting. After taking down the nearby enemies, Link rides away from the temple where we can see several noteworthy things. For one, there seems to be some kind of tower high up on the hillside here, but it's what's just ahead that's really exciting. But first, do you see the rock here? Well, it's the same rock in the very next scene on the left, confirming this is the same area. Now on to the exciting stuff, but let's speed up the clip a bit to get to that point. So do you see that structure there? At first, it looks like some kind of castle, but if you look through the entrance, you can see the sky again. So upon closer inspection, we notice it bore a striking resemblance to the entrance to the Great Bridge of Hylia from Twilight Princess. See? And in case there were any doubt, if we back up the footage a bit, we can see what appears to be the bridge itself just behind it, as well as an identical gate on the opposite side. So going with this idea, let's take a look at the map of Lake Hylia from the original GameCube version of Twilight Princess. So notice how the bridge runs down the middle, splitting the lake in half, with the left side being a bit larger. Well, if we take a look at the map in Zelda Wii U, we can see a similarly shaped lake divided in two, complete with a river exiting from the northeast corner. So it would seem that Lake Hylia and its bridge are both making a return. Only in this case, the bridge appears to be undamaged, meaning this would take place before Twilight Princess, which makes sense if the setting is just after Skyward Sword. But of course, it's entirely possible this is all just a coincidence and this just happens to be a similar looking bridge. Anyways, if we go back to the clip, check out what's next. After Link turns just a bit right of the bridge, we can see what appears to be a smoldering volcano in the distance, which, as you probably guessed, is almost certainly Death Mountain. Now, Death Mountain is almost always located in the north in Zelda games, but almost isn't good enough for us here. Luckily, just a few seconds later, Link turns just a bit more to the right and looks directly at what appears to be the morning sun. And since the developers already confirmed that the sun sets in the west, that means he must be facing east. So, let's take a look at the map again and see if we can place where exactly we're at. So, if the Great Bridge of Hylia is here, and the sun is rising from the east over here, that means Death Mountain, which we saw was between the two, is probably somewhere around here. Knowing this, that means Link must be south of the bridge in this area, which is also where the temple that the developers mentioned is located. So now that we have some idea of the geography, let's take a look at the E3 trailer again, because as we pointed out in our first analysis, you can just barely see Death Mountain way off in the distance. And since we can see the rising sun here, which you now know is east, that means Death Mountain has to be to the south, which will place this area somewhere well north of Death Mountain on the map. So this means one of three things. One, either the in-game world extends far beyond what we can actually see on the map, which seems unlikely given the developers are on the opposite side of the world when they start the gameplay demo, or two, the game world has been revamped a lot since E3 and that area no longer exists, or three, maybe they changed the direction the sun rises in. Your guess is really as good as ours. Okay, we're almost done here, but there's still just a few final things I wanted to point out. For one, let's talk a little bit more about the enemies that Link encounters near the temple. First up, we're guessing these guys are this game's versions of the bokoblins based on their appearance. But oddly, these are the only enemies we see in the game world at all. So do they appear mostly near points of interest acting as bodyguards? The developers do hint at the idea in their discussion. Also, did you notice a health meter seems to appear above their heads when they take damage? That's totally new. And of course, we can see that Z targeting is clearly back, with a white arrow showing the enemy you'll target if you press Z, which changes to orange when you're actively targeting them. Next, I want to draw your attention to some of the little details that can be found throughout the gameplay footage. For example, in the early morning scene, did you notice how the sunlight reflects off the grass in its path? Yeah, this game is gorgeous. And speaking of the grass, it appears to react to your every action, like how it flattens when Link walks over it, and how it appears to spread apart as Epona is riding through it. You can even see blades of grass being kicked up in the process. And speaking of Epona, did you notice how the hair on her mane and tail now separates and bounces realistically with each step? It's pretty clearly physics-based now instead of being hand-animated like before. And even the objects strapped to her bounce in time too. That's pretty cool. And speaking of those objects, we can't help but wonder the mat strapped to the back might be used for sleeping to help quickly pass the time. Although if not, the developers did hint at something you can do to pass the time yourself, and that's picking apples from the trees. But why would you want to do this? Well, apples have appeared in some previous Zelda games and functioned as health restoring items, so maybe they do the same thing here. But we do have a slightly more wild idea. Remember how we mentioned you were able to speed boost with Epona seemingly endlessly? What if the apples replace a carrot meter from Ocarina of Time, allowing you to gallop as long as you have apples to reward Epona with? Yeah, it's a stretch, but who knows. At the least, the fact that apples actually grow on trees here suggests that the developers are really trying to make this a living, breathing world. And we can see further proof of this in the wildlife that appears near the end of the gameplay footage. For example, did you notice the creature on top of the rock here, just before the bridge? It looks like it might be some kind of deer. Then shortly after, Link comes across a pack of wild horses, who run away when he gets close. But interestingly, we can see that they run away not because he got close, but because Epona switched to a gallop. So, this suggests that galloping might actually alert nearby enemies as well. Could this tie into the whole idea of using the cloak to maintain a low profile that we theorized about before? Maybe stealth will play some kind of role in this game. And shortly after, we can see what appears to be another deer-like creature near the wall. Now interestingly, all of these creatures appear in the same general area. Maybe they were drawn to it because of the fresh water supply in Lake Hylia nearby, or maybe because of the nearby apple trees. And speaking of water, let's take a look at Link's map one more time. Because, did you notice how there are several islands all over the landscape, including one behind Link's starting location? Most of them seem too far to swim to, so could there be a boat of some kind? Now the map also displays water as two different shades of blue, with the lighter one likely indicating shallower water, considering it only appears in rivers, lakes, and near the shoreline. But why the need to display this information? We think the lighter color might be used to indicate where you can actually swim, and that you might need a boat or something else to traverse the deeper blue waters. Finally, did you notice the markings on the temple statues? They look kind of similar to the markings found in the statue in the original trailer. And, just a bit later in the gameplay footage, Link passes a rock with yet another distinctive marking. Are these connected in some way? Alright, and with that, we're finally done covering everything we could dig up in the latest gameplay footage. As always, let us know if we missed anything by posting in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and make sure to stay tuned to GameXplain.com for more on Zelda Wii U and other things gaming too.